Can you remember when the banks went down and the deficit and the national debt? Has everyone forgot about that, or was that just made up? Can you remember? That's why there's been cuts and that's why there's been austerity, because we've got to close the gap. Okay. And these lot think there wasn't a deficit and it was all made up.
OK, the man in red there in the back row, just away from you.
If we actually closed these tax loopholes, made people to pay their taxes, we wouldn't need cuts to begin with. Deficit would be reduced.
Incidentally, this government is closing HMRC offices right around the UK. Yeah. You would have thought they'd be wanting to get the tax money in.
All right. Wait a minute. If everybody talks, nobody hears anything. The man in red, and you were talking to him over there, and I'll keep the panel quiet just for the moment.
There's £36 billion in austerity measures. There's over £30 billion in unpaid tax. Don't take a genius to realise if we close the tax loopholes, get that £30 billion in tax, we don't need to make austerity measures. Yep. There you go. Deficit reduced.
Got a point. You want to come back on this, Owen?
Well, the gentleman's got a point. The truth is that the tax gap, the gap between how much we should be getting in and how much we are getting in, according to the government itself, has gone up on their watch. If they've been so careful to try and clamp down on tax avoidance, as David Cameron would have us all believe, it wouldn't be rising in this country. It's up to 34 billion. But the big question here is, what are the choices, the priorities of government? Are they choosing, in this period of austerity, to get extra money from those people who've got a lot of money, to ask those with the widest shoulders to bear the biggest burden? Or are they instead looking for the little man, whether it's the small business or individuals here and across the country, to carry the burden? And I fear the last 6 years has seen the little man carry the burden far too often.
All right, I'll come to you. You're in the front row there.
Angus, you were very quick to criticise cuts, but what would you be doing now if you were leading an independent Scotland with no money?
Well, the first thing...
Oh, no, but I mean, thank you, Angus. We'll come back to that another day. You're in the green shirt there.
Yes, indeed. Well, I've heard it all now. The inheritance tax is all Europe's fault. That's the first time. It's amazing, that, really. But what we're forgetting, we're looking at the big guys. We're mixing things up here. We're looking at the big guys, you know, who are avoiding the tax, you know, the Googles of this world. It's nothing. But inheritance tax is going to hit a lot of middle people, especially in London and the South East, where they live in a dingy semi and it's worth £1 million. They'll all fall into this inheritance tax. So we may have to look at doing a two-tier inheritance tax, maybe for London and the South East, and do a lot lower for the rest of the country. Because a lot of people who are living in the South East are living in these houses for years, and suddenly they're going massively up in value, and there's no stopping it at the moment.
And you up there.
I think the debate is all focused on the wrong thing. We're talking about cutting inheritance tax, but what we should be looking at is the tax that's gone up over the decades and really affects the poorest in society. Yes. And what we should do is stop VAT, cut it, you'll get the economy booming again, people will start buying, and that's where a real choice that will affect people's lives, it will affect their energy bills, it will affect the whole economy.
All right.
So hold on, Daniel, I'll chair this, not you. I heard him too. I know you... But it's true. Owen did just say, as you said, VAT should be abolished.
And
a very good point.
Could we do that while we are in the European Union?
Please.
Raise income tax on the richest.
No, hang on. He said it was a very good point. Well, is Labour policy now under your leadership to abolish VAT?
No, that's not what he said. He said cut VAT. In the last Labour government, if you remember, when we hit the crash,
I didn't say
cut VAT.
I said abolish it.
He said abolish. He said abolish.
And we saw an extra £5 billion in the economy.
You know that cannot be done while we're members of the European Union.
We don't
have the right to cut our own indirect
sales tax like
taxes.
America, which is 5%. But, you know...
The person in spectacles there in the second row from the back. You.
I feel like we've got away from the real issue here, which is inheritance...
No, really?
Which is inheritance tax.
Yes,
and
what do you
I
think
was reading on the Equality Trust website that one of the biggest reasons that people are rich in the UK is because they were born rich. And that's the purpose behind inheritance tax. It's to deal with that... Shut up. The purpose behind the tax is to deal with that trouble. Whether it's an efficient tax is a question that needs to be answered. And if it's not, then we need to look at other ways to address the issue of how prosperity wealth is derived from who your parents are rather than what you work for.
OK, thank you. And I'll take one more point from the woman there, and then I've got a last question. Yes.
I don't disagree with the gentleman's point about possibly banding it to different levels, because one of the comments that Cameron made when he was commenting on finally decided to tell us the truth was it was only £20,000 that he got. Well, at the time, £20,000 was 2 years' wages to somebody up here.
Right.
So maybe you tax it based on how much money the person it's going to has got, rather than the geographical area or something like that.
OK. Ian Thompson, a last question for us.
At what stage does a politician's private life wander into the public interest?
What stage does a politician's private life wander into the public interest? This, of course, is about the Culture Secretary, John Whittingdale, and the stories about him that have emerged in the press, and whether they should or shouldn't have done. Jenny Jones.
I do think that even Tory politicians deserve a private life. But there does seem to be something a little bit odd about this whole story, because it was exactly the sort of thing that newspapers would normally have run under a sort of kiss and tell thing. So I am curious about why some newspapers didn't run this particular story. And quite honestly, I just think there should be one rule for all, you know, and preferably that people can have a private life, and that when you have sex between consenting adults, then that seems to be OK in most people's books.
So hang on, so you think it's OK to have a private life, but you're curious why the press didn't run it? Those two things are in conflict.
Oh, not at all.
What, you think they should have run it, even though people are entitled to a private life?
No, in this instance, I'm surprised that they didn't run it, because they usually do. They're usually very quick to run stories about politicians doing anything wrong, whether or not they're, you know, it's with a sex worker or whatever.
Going to the cutting to the chase on it, the idea that put about is that it's because he had influence over the press, they thought they could hold him hostage. Do you think that's what happened?
I have absolutely no idea. There's been bits and pieces, dribbles coming out about this story over today and yesterday. I have absolutely no idea what the truth is. But personally, I think that politicians, everyone, should be able to have a private life.
Owen Smith.
Well, it may not be popular, but I think even politicians should be entitled to have a private life, and therefore I don't think there is any public interest ordinarily in the sex lives of politicians. In this instance, I think there is...
You think they're boring?
There is a question to be asked. There is a question to be asked, which is, because this man, John Whittingdale, is in charge of determining whether we're going to have the second half of the Leveson inquiry into phone hacking, into the key bit, really, the corruption between the police and the press that lay at the heart of the awful phone hacking scandal that saw Millie Dowler's phone hacked and all of those other dreadful things happen. You know, John Whittingdale was someone who was very much in favour, when he was chairman of the Culture Select Committee, of the second half of the Leveson inquiry taking place. He said so on public occasions.
Can you get to the point? We don't have all night.
And now he's changed his mind. Now he's changed his mind. Now he says perhaps we don't need... Well, I'm saying there is a question to be asked, and he can solve it, can't he? Very simply. He can either announce tomorrow that he's going to go ahead and have the second part of the Leveson inquiry, and then there would be clearly no evidence to suggest that there was any undue influence on him, or he could say there was, and therefore I shouldn't take part in this decision any longer.
And what about if there wasn't and he still doesn't want to go ahead with the second part of Leveson? What does he do then?
In that case, he needs to explain why it is he's changed his mind in the last couple of months since becoming Culture Secretary. So you're using this to bullying him into doing what you at Labour want him to do? I'm using it to ask, I think, a genuine question as to whether this important inquiry has been put on the long finger by the Tory party, and was there any reason for this minister wanting to do that?
Daniel Hannan.
I mean, I really think if you're going to allege something, allege it. Don't insinuate in this way. It's cowardly and it's unmanly.
I thought I was fairly straightforward.
The reason that this story was not run is because it's not a story. Single man has girlfriend, right? It's not exactly Watergate. So, of course, the newspapers didn't see it as a huge issue, and nor should they have done. And what I found extraordinary was all the people who'd been campaigning for newspapers not to run stories like this, all the hacked off and so on. When the system worked, when they got exactly the kind of outcome that they'd been calling for, they're now complaining because they happen not to like the person who they think should have been exposed. And I think we can all draw our own conclusions about their motivation and their hypocrisy.
Dear, and then I'll come to you, Anson.
Well, to me, again, it is a non-story, really. It is as Dan says, it's a single adult having a relationship with another single adult. So there is no story. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest anything untoward happening. So in the absence of any of that, it seems very much like that in this case in particular, the newspapers can't really win. Because if they had gone ahead and published this non-story, as I think it is, it would have been entirely plausible that the campaigners would have said they're only publishing this story and making a meal of it because they have a grudge against this person, against John Whittingdale. And now that they haven't published it, it seems like the suggestion is that something shady is going on. But in the absence of any evidence, I just don't see what the story is. I just don't see what the fuss is about.
Angus.
I was disgusted by the media coverage. I thought it was prurient, and I think it was a gross invasion of somebody who I oppose politically and his private life. I think if there are serious allegations to make them. Don't give some newspapers an excuse to print pictures of you, the woman you were going out with, what she did for a living, etc., etc., etc. And incidentally, this is exactly the same excuse and tactic that was used in previous decades to say that gay men and women couldn't serve in public life because they could be blackmailed on different issues. It was wrong then, it's wrong now. If there are allegations that can be substantiated, make that argument.
So you...
Make that argument. And provide the evidence. And provide the evidence.
OK. So you disagree with Owen Smith on this?
I disagree profoundly. I think the Labour Party really let itself down this week by allowing those who would wish to print prurient invasion of somebody's privacy, and I think they gave a very slim excuse that was of public interest. If there's evidence,
the Labour
publish it.
The Labour Party didn't
evidence,
raise this
publish
issue.
it.
The BBC chose to raise this
Some of your
issue.
colleagues were on the radio and weren't even prepared to answer the question because they were so embarrassed about what was happening.
We're running out of time, so Owen, just a last word to you, and then we must
stop. What we are saying very simply is, why is it that the second part of the Leveson inquiry hasn't gone ahead? The Prime Minister promised Millie Dowler's parents that would happen. He isn't delivering it, and this is relevant to the issue at hand. It's relevant to John Whittingdale.
All right. Our time's up. I'm sorry we have to stop there.